Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And today I want to talk about a budget deck. Not just a budget deck, but a really solid, strong budget deck that I think you'll be able to build pretty quickly and have a lot of fun with it. And what I'm talking about is Elite Grievous, that is 2 dice of Grievous for 18, and 1 die count Dooku for 11, giving you a grand total of 29. Look at that, the deck is so good, it doesn't even need its full 30. So let's take a look at the very basics, just at these guys' cards, and see why they synergize so well. So basically with General Grievous, what we have is a character with incredible damage dice. So this is a character that is putting pressure on your opponent immediately. You just put him on the table and they go, ugh, Grievous. Jeez, look at those dice. 2, 2, 3. 50% of the time you are rolling 2 or more damage. And when you roll that 3, oh my goodness, it's brutal. And then beyond that, if your opponent dares play, an upgrade, like some equipment or a weapon, when he kills them, he takes it. So almost every game I've played Grievous now, which is something like 6 or 7, he has stolen a weapon. I believe in every game, actually, he's stolen somebody's weapon. So it's much more powerful than I initially thought it would be. It sounds really easy to play around. You just overwrite it, or you put it on the character that Grievous isn't attacking. But in order to do that, it means you can't play a weapon early, because whatever character you end up playing the weapon on, Grievous can just instantly target that guy and, as we'll see, blitz down quite a bit of damage. So on the one hand, you have Grievous, a massive damage dealer with a cool ability that has a reasonable health total of 10. And then on the flip side, you have Count Dooku. So Count Dooku is your live a long time guy. Grievous is your aggro character. Dooku is a control character that lives forever. His ability says before this character is dealt 1 damage or more, you may discard a card from your hand to give him a shield. Essentially what that means is if Dooku takes damage, he can discard a card to prevent 1 of those damages. So let's say your opponent resolves 3 1 melee attack dice. Each of those are different. They are different resolutions. So you can go, for the first one, discard. Second one, discard. Third one, discard. I'll take no damage, thank you very much. Yes, you do burn through your hand really quickly this way, but it's a great way to keep him alive forever. And as we're going to see, we've got tricks. We've got tricks to keep Dooku alive and to make him take even more damage. And his dice are not bad. 2 melee, 1 melee, pretty solid dice as well. So this combination of characters I found is incredibly strong. So let's take a look at the aggro aspect of this deck. So on the more aggressive front, we have a whole slew of cards that let us do damage either out of nowhere or very powerfully. So a great example of this is Tactical Mastery. As long as Grievous is still alive, and let me give you a hint, if he dies early, you're dead. You can take up to 2 additional actions. So for 1, you play this, you roll Grievous, 50% of the time he's rolling sick dice, and then you just immediately resolve. So I've had tons of games where I go, okay, I'll pay 1 Tactical Mastery, roll Grievous, 5 damage. That is a very difficult amount of damage to deal with at any point in the game, especially later when your opponent's thinking like, okay, I got tricks, I've got 3 cards in my hand, I've got a flank, I've got these other cards, I'm going to handle this, and you Tactical Mastery them, and they're just like, oh, goodness, what am I supposed to do? Force Strike is a similar card, where it's turning a die out of nowhere to do melee damage. Now, if you notice, it's blue only, so it doesn't work with Grievous. Thank goodness. If it worked with Grievous, it would be out of this world. But we did see Dooku has a 2 damage, and we put in Lightsaber in part to work really well with Force Strike. So the Lightsaber can do 3 as long as you have a resource. So for 2 resources, you can do 3 damage with your Lightsaber, even if it's on a blank. And for 1 resource, you can do 2 damage with Dooku, no matter what he's sitting at as well. That is a really powerful tool to be able to do damage out of nowhere. Going back to the Lightsaber synergizes really well with Grievous, because yes, it has a +2, but Grievous is always rolling melee damage, right? Maybe he'll whiff the first time, but that's the beauty of Star Wars Destiny. You're going to get rerolls. And if half of his sides do melee damage, the odds are astounding that he won't do any in a turn. And so with the special and with the 3 3 damage side, it's another card in the deck that's 3 sides of damage. So you have your character rolling 2 dice, you have a lightsaber. This becomes incredibly powerful, and we'll see we have some ways to cheat this out for free, which become even better. All In is a card I'm not really attached to. It's been really good in one game. I'm going to have to do some more testing with it. But theoretically, it could be really good where you get a bunch of different dice out there. Maybe you have like a special on a lightsaber, a damage on Grievous, some other cards, like a special on a holocron or something, and you just go boosh for 1. All these actions, you could only deal with one of them at a time with your cards, and now I just get to resolve them all. It can be theoretically really powerful. It is a higher rarity, so we'll talk about that in a bit. Alright, so I've already been alluding to the holocron, and yes, there is a holocron. It's a blue deck. Now, this deck, unlike a lot of holocron decks, is not reliant on the holocron. So one of the things I love so much about this deck, a lot of decks that run holocron, you're like, come on holocron, come on holocron, hard mulligan for holocron. Oh no, I didn't get it. 3 turns later, you're practically weeping because you haven't found your holocron yet. This deck, if you miss your holocron, you're like, hey Grievous, let's do this. And you roll off some dice. But when you do get the holocron, what ends up happening is you usually put the stuff on Dooku because they're busy trying to kill Grievous, and Dooku slowly over the course of the game becomes a wrecking ball on his own. I mean, if you get a Mind Probe on Dooku and you're just rolling 3 and 4 damage with Mind Probe, that's a lot of damage out of nowhere with Dooku. Same thing with Force Throw. Immobilize is great for control. So all this whole package is good, but it's not something you have to have. Like, if you just can't seem to open the common or the rare holocron, you don't have to use it. It's not an imperative part. It's just a really good card. Like, it's so good that it's hard if you're playing blue not to use it. Alright, let's talk about now what I think is my favorite part of this deck. What makes this deck so cool is that when you combine Dooku's ability with these 2 cards, you have a combination that feels completely and ridiculously unfair. Here's what I mean. Hidden Shadows is amazing. It only costs 1. You put it on your character. You just exhaust it and get a shield if they don't have a shield. It's a great target for Grievous. They're always going for him, so he's always getting a shield a turn. And it's a great target for Dooku, especially if you can get Personal Escort on Dooku. Guardian is perhaps my favorite keyword in the game and my favorite mechanic in the game. And when you can get, say, a turn 1 Personal Escort on Dooku, your opponent is incredibly frustrated, right? They roll a 2 damage die, and you're like, okay, that's cool. I will activate Dooku. I will activate his Guardian keyword. I'll take that 2 damage on Dooku. By the way, I'll discard a card to prevent 1, so it's only 1 damage, and now they can't hit Grievous and kill him. And if Dooku gets a Hidden Shadows and a Personal Escort, oh my goodness, that means whatever die he eats, he generally just eats it all to shields. 1 to Hidden Shadows, 1 to a discard, and then move on to the next turn and immediately activate Hidden Shadows again. This combination on Count Dooku is incredibly powerful if you have a card he's protecting. I have a feeling there are going to be many archetypes built around this, but having somebody like Grievous as this wrecking ball that you cannot ignore makes it incredibly useful to be able to ping damage here and there on Dooku to let Grievous live as long as possible. The longer Grievous lives, the more likely you're going to win. In addition to the nice setup of Guardian and Shields, there's also mitigation in the deck as well. This is really necessary, and blue has some really great tools for this. Feel Your Anger. It's just a phenomenal card. If their roll is shaky in any way, no matter how good the top part of it is, you get to destroy that by removing dice. Remember, it's not remove the number of blanks showing. It's if they roll 2 blanks, you get to remove their 2 awesome dice and leave the 2 blanks. Oh, it's an incredibly frustrating card to have played on you. Isolation is pretty specific. Dooku has to be alive, but the good news is with this deck, they're usually killing Grievous. Dooku is the guy they ignore. So as long as he's alive, you just for 1 remove any one of their character dice. This is generally really powerful. A lot of decks have plus sides on their upgrades, and they're relying on their character dice to give them the regular side so they can even resolve those plus sides. And you're not re-rolling it. You're, whoop, just hauling it right off the board. It's incredibly powerful. Deflect I only have as a one of because it's situational. It is a serious blowout card against range decks, against decks that are trying to rush out Falcons and ATSTs. It's just unfair. But there's just not enough of that right now to warrant 2. But I could easily see going to 2. It's a meta call. The same thing with Intimidate. If shield decks become the norm, then you want to probably run 2 Intimidates and find a cut somewhere. But right now, I like 1 because everyone has shields, right? No one has a deck that has literally 0 shields. And so it's a big time blowout usually. To be something like, it's near the end of the round, they've done most of their plays, you're saving your 2 damage, and they're like, it's fine, I got 2 shields. And then you just go, boom, Intimidate. And they're like, oh, you're kidding me. Now, Padme dies to the 2 that you have showing. That's ridiculous, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, Intimidate, I really like as a 1 of, and maybe it becomes a 2 of. But essentially, you need mitigation in your deck, and I think these cards are really good. Use the Force is a really good card because it's so flexible. You can either turn their problematic die or turn your die. The problem with it, of course, is it's only a turn. And turn means they can re-roll it if they need to. They can mitigate your dice. What I really like to do, the ideal scenario, was wait until after they claim the battlefield, and then you go ahead and turn like Grievous to his 3 side and just wreck them. And you know what you can do at the end of the turn? If they haven't taken the battlefield, but it looks like they don't have any more actions, and you only have 1 resource, if you feel gutsy, you can turn to the 3 side, and then the battlefield I've been using is Rebel War Room. And Rebel War Room says resolve 1 of your dice. If it has a resource cost, you do not have to pay it. So that can be incredibly useful with Grievous's 3 side, with the Lightsaber's 3 side, with Mind Probe's 3 damage for a resource. There's quite a few dice in this deck that at their peak damage need a resource. And that's what you're going for in this deck, is that peak damage really fast. The last 2 cards in the deck that I haven't talked about are 1 copy of Power of the Dark Side and 1 copy of Enrage. Neither of them are necessary in the deck, but they're both fine, useful tools. Power of the Dark Side can be a great closer at the end of the game, especially if you have Holocron still hanging around. Being able to re-roll those and know that you might get 2 unblockable damage is fantastic. Being able to just re-roll a Grievous die 1 more time can be great to try to get that big damage. I kind of like Enrage as another card that out of nowhere can do a lot of damage. So there's situations where you're going to re-roll something like Grievous, and he gets his 3/1 side. You have 1 card left in hand, you have no resources, and your opponent goes, I've got a die out here, but we're playing with your battlefield. I'm going to take it so that you can't claim it and resolve that Grievous 3 damage, 1 resource side. And then you can just immediately follow it up with like Enrage. You get, a resource, and then you are able to resolve it. And that's not the only scenario. There's plenty of times where 1 more resource can be helpful. It's another card, both of these, with more play, with more fine-tuning. I could see both of them coming out, especially for meta calls. Like I said, if you really need more Deflects, if you really need more copies of Intimidate, these are 2 places to go first. Alright, so I said that this deck was a budget deck, and it is a budget deck. There is not a single legendary in the whole deck. However, you might be looking at me and saying, oh, come on, Tiny. Sure, there's not a legendary, but how day 1 or day 2 am I supposed to have all these uncommons that are in there, this Force Throw, you have 2 of them. I don't want to have to buy 2 of the starter sets. So let's take a look at how valuable this suite of cards is. I would say all in, not at all necessary. You want to cut it? Cut it. The second copy of Force Throw, it's fine. It's another Holocron card. I would probably put in a different, cheaper ability if I didn't have access to it. That's fine as well. The stickier points are these top 6 cards. 2 copies of Tactical Mastery, 2 copies of Hidden Shadows, and 2 copies of Force Strike. These 6 cards are really, really strong. You could get away with not having Hidden Shadows, I think. Your Guardian ability would be worse, but you could still do it because Dooku has the built-in shield. So I think it's fine to not have them, but I would definitely want them if I had them. Tactical Mastery is a lot harder to give up because one of the problems is if you go up against control decks and you roll your Grievous dice, they're probably going to have a way to handle them, and so you're going to have to hit the damage sides multiple times. Now, because it's a 50-50, that's entirely possible, but being able to play Tactical Mastery is really strong. And it's just going to be a strong card in every deck. I would try to get 2 copies of this as soon as you possibly can. Force Strike is another card that it's really good in a couple of decks. I'm a little bit torn as to how much of a staple this is going to be in all decks. I personally love it because of things like Lightsaber. It's great with Vader. I have it as a 2 of in all my Vader decks. So I like it a lot. I think you could get away with it with not running it in this deck. I would want it, but you can get away with it. So really the one card that's almost impossible to get away with is Tactical Mastery. And you can. I think the deck will suffer though. So let's look at some possible replacements. So we've already talked about 2. One being a second copy of Deflect. Another being a second copy of Intimidate. If you're going to take out Force Throw, I think you probably want another ability. Force Choke would be my first choice, but it is a legendary, so if you haven't gotten it, I wouldn't rush out to get Force Choke just for this deck. It is a great card, though, so it'll be good in many decks. Force Training is another card that's okay. I don't really like this card very much, but you can do things like get this out for free with a Holocron, and then pay only 1 to overwrite it with a Lightsaber, which can be incredibly useful. Another card I tried for a little while was Boundless Ambition. This card can be really good because it works very well with something like if you have a Holocron out, there's not as many abilities in this deck, so you can get those. You can get more cards to use for Dooku's ability. You have more chances just to re-roll Grievous's awesome dice. You have a better chance to get something like Tactical Mastery. Like, it can be an okay card. I don't really love it in the deck, but if you're hurting for cards to put in, it can be useful. I feel like Sweep the Area is interesting. I don't think I would play this in the deck, but if you're desperate, it's kind of interesting. For 0, you could re-roll one of your opponent's dice if you have Grievous out. And Closing the Net looks pretty cool, actually. I think it's saying it's 1 cost. This is a really rough image of a spoiler, but it says force an opponent to choose and remove one of their dice. You may place this event on the bottom of your deck instead of discarding it. So it's kind of cool. For 1, you get to just force an opponent to remove one of their dice and cycle it. The problem is, notice it says force an opponent to do this. They're choosing it. And so that makes it substantially less powerful than something like Flank, which could probably also go in as well. Flank is a rough one in this because you really want to roll Grievous right away. It's why I didn't suggest it. But essentially, there are a lot of cards in the pool that you can use to replace any of these 8 cards. But to be honest, they're not going to be that hard to get. They're only uncommons and the second copy of Force Throw. So my suggestion would be to try to get as many of the good uncommons as you can early. I think all 6 of these are going to be worth having. All in, not quite as much. I hope you have as much fun with your first budget deck as I've been having with this deck. I've played quite a few games in a row with my Grievous Dooku deck. I have not actually lost yet. It's been incredibly powerful. People tilt real fast when you go turn 1, boosh, 5 damage. And they're just like, dude, really? Like, Han's half dead? What was I supposed to do about that? And you just kind of go, I don't know. I mean, that's what Grievous does. He mauls people. That is his thing. So this deck is really strong for a budget deck. I think this is going to, some incarnation of this will end up being a deck that is a player in the meta. I don't know if it'll be a top deck. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to completely predict the future. What I can say is today, with nearly every card spoiled, this deck is strong, and I think it will continue to be so. So please do leave comments below letting me know what your success has been like with this deck. And hopefully you'll be able to build it or something really close to it right out of the gate. So have a good time, and I'll see you next time on Tiny Grimes Games.